So hi, welcome to this episode of History Hunters. I'm in a California town that most of you probably have never heard of. That's because it's located just south of one of the largest cities here in Central California, and that is the city of Modesto, which is about 250,000 people. I'm in Ceres, California. This town's a little under 50,000 population, but it has a rich history. Now, we are smack dab in the middle of the Central Valley of California, which is known for being the breadbasket of the world because so many crops are raised here and shipped out to the rest of the country. Ceres, California was established as a wheat growing region in the 1860s. That product was taken out of here by river barges on the rivers because there was no highway and there was no railroad at the time. The railroad came in about 1870, and from that point on the town has grown, but it has a rich history. A number of the people who made this town what it is are buried in the cemetery. But there's a lot of other interesting folks here. The wife of one of the three stooges that's buried here. We have a Civil War soldier who actually met Abraham Lincoln while he was ailing in the hospital. Now, this cemetery also has one of the victims of the I-5 Strangler. We also have the parents of a rather infamous congressman who came from this town. I'm going to tell you all about them on this episode of History Hunters. This cemetery's changed quite a bit since the first burials here in the 1870s. But I want to come over here and show you this plot here. It's that of the Whitmores. Daniel Whitmore was the founder of Ceres, and his wife Lucy, they are buried in this location right here. He was primarily a wheat farmer. He came out here from Massachusetts to make a better life. He first settled in Stockton, where he also grew wheat. His marker's right here. DW stands for Daniel Whitmore, and his wife, Lucy Whitmore. They built their first home in Ceres, and it's on 5th Street. It's still standing. It's a historical landmark. The back of this marker here shows one of the historic homes of Ceres. It's the Clinton Whitmore Mansion. It is still standing as well. The city owns it. This is on the back of the marker of one of the descendants of Clinton Whitmore. It's Robert and Edna Whitmore. It's Highway 99, so there's a lot of freeway noise coming off of it. Right here is a very interesting grave. It's that of Amos Hatch. He was the son of Ephraim Hatch. He was born in 1863. And you can see he died in 1880. He was actually the son of Ephraim and C.M. Hatch. The description at the base says, "What sad emotions fill our minds, as o'er the grave we've been, where sleeps a son so true and kind, our dear and earthly friend." Now, the Hatches would go on to raise 2 other children in prosperity. They would later live in a large mansion at 11th and Santa Clara Avenues in San Jose in the late 1890s. But that mansion was actually destroyed in the 1906 earthquake. Here's the backside of Amos Hatch's grave. Got that, looks like a fern. It's amazing when you think about how long this has been out here in the California sun. 1880. It's incredible. So it used to be a long time ago that they would bring the dead through this gate. But as you can see, there's a giant wall there that has a raised roadway. It was part of the new interchange that had to come about, which cut off this section, the older section of the cemetery. But I did want to talk to you about this gentleman right here. It's got a little nice marker. It's that of David Woodbridge. He died October 27, 1907, at the age of 85. He came to California during the gold rush when he was 28, aboard a whaling ship from Maine to San Francisco, and the journey took 150 wearisome days. He mined for gold in Tuolumne County and then farmed in Stockton for 25 years, moving to Ceres in 1876. Woodbridge was one of the first overseers of this cemetery. As an overseer of this cemetery, he walked the same grounds that I'm walking today, which is kind of eerie when you think about it. We occupy the same ground, but all those people who were here before are now gone. They're either in the ground, their spirits are elsewhere. In the 1860s, the Central Pacific Railroad started building a rail line through the Central Valley of California. There was a lot of produce that was coming in and out of here at that time. There was a lot of wheat that needed to be shipped out, a lot of wheat products. Rail line would be the best way to do that. So by 1871, the rail line reached the towns of Ceres and Turlock. And by 1874, I understand there was a train depot here. The first train depot agent was a man by the name of Cyrus Lee. It's said that he was a spiritualist, so I guess he tried to make contact with the dead. That's his grave right there. Died in 1893. He was 77 years old. We don't have any photographs of him, but he has a pretty nice obelisk marker here. Looks like that's a book. If I were guessing, I would say perhaps it was a Bible. It's like his wife died 3 years later. She was 55 years old. So he had a much younger wife of Cyrus Lee. So I have to tell you that there was one of my viewers who got a little upset with me at one of the last videos that I did. He said that my obsession with death was too much for him. And I replied, well, so I guess that means that we're supposed to ignore anybody who was in history because they are now dead. But I find that history is really fascinating. And you can't talk about history unless you talk about people who are dead. So we know nothing about this guy. He has a very nice marker. He was 32 years old. Darwin Pickett passed to the higher life October 26, 1885 from Ceres, California.
This is another Civil War veteran, Alfred J Roberts, who lived from 1848 to 1929. He was 80 years old when he passed away. He had enlisted as a private in Tennessee on February 15, 1862. He was then transferred to Company H of the 5th Kentucky Cavalry. Roberts came to California in 1876 and made his way to Ceres to farm. He ran for the 1st constable post in this town but lost the election to an Asa Johnson. Benjamin B. Wilson lived from 1839 to 1909. He also fought in the Civil War in Company I of the 96th Illinois Infantry. He left his family in Illinois behind to join the California Gold Rush and presumably returned to fight in the Civil War.
Check it out. Homeless camps all throughout this country, mostly California. Right here is the grave of Stanton Helsley. He died 1855. He was a judge here in Ceres. But the one I want to talk about is his father, who was Joseph M. Helsley. He lived from 1845 to 1929. If you look at the bottom there, it says CSA. That stands for Confederate States of America. That's right, this is one of the few Confederate graves here in the cemetery. Joseph Helsley was a minister. He came to Ceres to take pastorship of First Baptist Church in 1899, and he grew up in the Rockingham County area of Virginia. He enlisted February 15, 1864 in the Company H of the 7th Virginia Cavalry of the Confederate States of America. It was also known as Ashby's Cavalry. It was a regiment that was raised in the spring of 1861. The regiment was composed primarily of men from counties of Shenandoah Valley in the region. Now initially, it was in command by a Colonel Angus William McDonald. Later, it was under the command of Thomas Stonewall Jackson. In the spring of 1862, the regiment took part in Jackson Valley's campaign, where the exploits of its unit commander, Turner Ashby, became famous as the Black Knight of the Confederacy. Ashby was mortally wounded. Now, it's probably not in his case, since he joined in 1864, but that group also was involved in the Gettysburg battle. They took part in Jubal Early's ill-fated Valley campaigns of 1864, though much of the unit escaped through federal lines and returned home to disband rather than taking parole with the rest of the Army of Northern Virginia. Some members were there at Appomattox when Lee surrendered to Grant. I find that cemeteries are pretty fascinating because of the stories and the history that they represent. I'm going to talk to you about a man by the name of George Averill. His nickname was Will Averill. He was one of the most beloved people in Ceres. He died in 1929, but it's his days as a soldier in the Army of the Potomac back in the 1860s that are the most fascinating to me, and I want to relate a story. Now, George came here in Ceres in 1879 with his brother Jesse. They took over a blacksmith shop. It's not here anymore, of course, but it was down where the Oddfellows Hall in downtown Ceres is today. It was there that he repaired wagons and he fixed buggies. And one of his customers was his sister Viola. Right here next to the road, you will find this upright marker for George W. Averill, Company F, the 6th Maine Infantry. Will had served in the Civil War and he was assigned to the Army of the Potomac. He had been wounded in battle, and during a 9-month hospital stay, Abraham Lincoln came visiting the hospital. Lincoln noticed how tall George was and asked him to stand back to back to see who was taller. And as it turns out, Will was just 2 inches shorter than Abraham Lincoln, who was 6'4". On another occasion, Mary Todd Lincoln came into the hospital and gave Will and the other ailing soldiers oranges. So as a journalist, you have to be a little skeptical sometimes about what you read. Now, this account of George meeting Abraham Lincoln was published way back in the 1970s, I believe, by a well-known historian here in town. And I don't doubt now what I read, because I Googled whether or not Abraham Lincoln visited Union hospitals in the Washington, D.C. area, and I found out that there were about 12 of them. He often visited them. He was very concerned about the well-being of the soldiers. The story about Mary Lincoln also proved out in some of the internet research, because she also visited, and it said that she bought a lot of produce. She bought apples and oranges to give out to the soldiers. So Mr. Averill, he didn't make that up. It actually happened to him. I find that really fascinating. So George is right over here. Here's a sister of his, Lavina Rollins, and her husband, Warren Rollins. His sister, Florence Worrell, died in 1967. She is a sister of his. Allura Ulch died in 1936. She was kind of the town newspaper, the town librarian. She was a very popular person here in Ceres, California. And here's another sister, Angie Averill Hall. She was married into the Hall family. There's Susan Hall, another sister. Her husband, George. And here's George's brother, Jesse Averill, who died in 1906. So his participation in Ceres was cut short quite a bit. So earlier I mentioned that there's a wife of a Three Stooges buried here, and I found the grave of Bonnie Dorita. She was the wife of Curly Joe Dorita, who was known as the last of the Three Stooges. Now, it's a mystery as to why she's buried here in Ceres. However, I understand she got sick in Modesto. I don't know why she was in Modesto. She passed away, and her husband had her buried here. Now, Curly Joe is buried down in Hollywood, far away. So we're not sure what happened with that marriage. Apparently she was ill for a long time. Perhaps she had relatives up here, but nobody knows or has been able to tell me exactly why Bonnie Dorita is buried here. She was a chorus girl who met and married the last of the Three Stooges. When their fame started coming back into vogue in the 1950s, they needed somebody to replace Curly, who was one of the more popular, you know, the whoop, 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 whoop. That guy, he passed away early, so they needed somebody that looked like him. They picked Curly Joe Dorita. I was unable to find a single picture of Bonnie, but I understand that she was born in 1811 in Reading, Pennsylvania. Her real name was Esther Hartenstein. She found work as a chorus girl under the name of Bonnie Brooks. She met Joe Dorita, who started out his career as a vaudevillian. By 1921, he was working as a comic at burlesque theaters and even worked with Bud Abbott before teaming up with Lou Costello. And so while working with the New Columbia burlesque circuit, the young comic took to dancer Bonnie Brooks. They were married in 1935 by a justice of the peace in Ohio. And when they were married, he was just starting out as a 30-week run at the Roxy Theater in Cleveland. He eventually got into films, his debut coming in 1944 with Warner Brothers' The Doughgirls with Ann Sheridan. During World War II, he worked with the USO and traveled extensively overseas to entertain the troops with many Hollywood stars. So after Bonnie passed away, Curly Joe Dorita found love again. He married his second wife, Jean Sullivan. They were married in 1966, soon thereafter the death of his wife. Now, Joe Dorita died of pneumonia in 1993. So this is kind of an interesting name and interesting grave. It's of a Spurgeon C. Nail. He was from Alabama. He was a second-class fireman in the U.S. Navy. He lived from 1888 to 1934, and we found a picture of him. So as I was walking past this grave, I recognized the name and thought I would just stop and pay homage to him. This is Leo Robert Volk. He was a police officer, and he died in a 1973 traffic crash on Yosemite Boulevard in Modesto. He was raised in this town, and he's buried here as well. So one of the most famous people to come out of Ceres is a man by the name of Gary Condit. He was a U.S. congressman. You may have recognized the name because in 2001 he was probably the biggest news story prior to September 11th, and it involved a missing intern from Modesto. Her name was Chandra Levy. Congressman Condit was kind of central figure in that whole scandal. While he may say that he had no romantic ties to the missing intern, it brought down his political career. The reason I'm bringing him up is because his parents are buried right here. Velma Jean Condit, she died in 2017. She stood by her son during that entire scandal, and then of course her husband was Reverend Adrian Condit. He passed away 6 months ago. His name is not engraved on this headstone yet, but he is buried here. He was a well-known figure here in Ceres. He also stood by his son during the scandal. Now I know firsthand that they faulted the media, and they also faulted Chandra Levy herself for the scandal, glossing over their son's role in that entire scandal. But as you can see there on top, it says strolling over heaven forever and ever, amen. So sometimes you get to a cemetery and you find out the information on findagrave.com is inaccurate because it's only as good as the people who input it. I thought that the parents of one of the most famous residents of Ceres are buried here. I'm talking about Cliff Barrows. He was Billy Graham's right-hand man from the 1940s up until their death. All the crusades that you remember him being on TV, Cliff was the worship leader. He was the song leader. He also worked behind the scenes to pull off those crusades.
Because of the goodness and grace of God, I can say tonight I am not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth. Every moving of the Spirit of God has been accompanied with great singing. And so it has been in this campaign.
Cliff died in 2016. I believe he's buried back at the Billy Graham Library in Charlotte, North Carolina. Cliff has a very nice stone marker back there, back east, where it's engraved with his birth date and his death date. He was actually born here in Ceres. He grew up in Ceres at a farm southeast of town. He was a 1940 graduate of Ceres High School. And in about 1947, he met Billy Graham at a retreat. Billy needed a song leader, so Cliff stepped in, and from that point on, it was a brotherhood unlike no other. Well, we found out that his parents, Charles and Harriet Barrows, are not buried here. His mother was Harriet Griggs. The Griggs family came here to Ceres, I believe, in 1907. They were farmers, and I believe I found the great-grandparents, Daniel Griggs and Maria Griggs. Daniel lived from 1848 to 1913. And right over here are Cliff's grandparents, who are Clifford and Mamie Griggs. Mamie died in 1957, and he died in 1969. If you look right there, it's engraved with Isaiah 40:31. I just checked with the cemetery. There are no burial records for his parents, so we don't know where they are buried, if they are buried. Possibly could have been cremated. Helen Griggs here possibly was an aunt, I'm guessing, of Cliff Barrows. And if you check it out right there, it says, "With my song, Psalm 28:7, and it's got some musical notes. Will I praise him?" As you can tell by these inscriptions on these headstones, Cliff was raised in a very Christian family. I hope that you can hear me over the din of Highway 99 noise. It's just on the other side of the railroad tracks there. This part of the cemetery here contains the remains of Laura Hedick. She was a 20-year-old sex worker from Modesto. She was the second victim of the I-5 Strangler, Roger Kibbe. Roger Kibbe also worked here in Ceres at a cabinet shop until he moved up north. He was a married man. His wife didn't even know about his sick obsession. He would pick them up and kill them. He strangled them to death. Now, it's been said that he killed at least 7 women that they know of, and possibly up to 34 or 35 other women who are now missing persons cases. Because she was poor, because of her age, I don't know about her parents, she was buried in an unmarked grave. So we're over here in this section near the freeway. An unmarked grave here. Next to this sergeant, the Army sergeant who served in Korea, Kenneth O'Donnell. Right next to it is the grave of Laura Hedick. She was last seen alive getting into a white Ford Maverick in downtown Modesto, and it's believed that she was killed on April 21st, 1986, but her remains were not discovered until 5 months later. She was buried right here. She was a victim of Roger Kibbe, who was the I-5 Strangler. He was finally sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences in 2009. But in 2021, just last year, he encountered some poetic justice when another inmate choked him to death in his cell at Mule Creek State Prison. The last grave that I want to feature is Wanda Rogers. She was a country singer. I knew her. She was quite a character. She was this little short Spitfire redhead lady. Had roots in New Mexico. In fact, I think she was from Roswell, New Mexico. She became kind of a hit down south on the radio. Wanda Faye was a short-time Columbia Records recording artist who sang with Glenn Campbell, Lefty Frizzell, Johnny Cash, Ernest Tubb, Minnie Pearl, and Roy Orbison. She found her niche in local country music circles after settling down here in Modesto. She passed away at the age of 89. While she achieved only limited fame with some of her music, making the top 10 in country charts, Wanda Faye is hailed as a legend in a museum operated by the Historical Society of Southeast New Mexico in her birthtown of Roswell, New Mexico. In fact, her first guitar, a 1953 Ginsberg, is on display there. Wanda told me that the highlight of her career was when Columbia Records signed her as an artist, which led to the recording of The Longest Night, which reached #4 on the Billboard charts in 1966. In 1964, her record Old Memories Keep Returning was her personal favorite. I have never seen a grave that had one of these codes on it, and I tried to use it and it didn't work.
Please turn my broken heart so I can get a new girl mended. Please turn my broken heart. I'll tell the world it always turned out splendid.
One of the last things I want to show you is this old World War I cannon. I doubt if it's ever been fired. The cemetery director told me, however, that somebody tried to steal this thing, tried to push it. It's very heavy. Tried to push it right out that entrance, and they found it out there by the gate one morning where they had abandoned their quest to steal this thing. So I want to thank you for joining us on this episode of History Hunters, where we look back at some of the interesting folks here buried at the Ceres Memorial Park in Ceres, California. We would love to hear your comments. We would love to have you give us a thumbs up. But we've also been hearing from people asking, they subscribe. They say, hey, you haven't been posting videos in a while. We say, hey, we post a video every week. So it leads me to believe they haven't hit the notification bell. We post every Sunday. That trend should continue. But so you don't miss any videos, we'd love for you to just tap the notification bell. That way when we post a video, you will know when it happens. Thank you so much.